Hi friends, today I want to talk about AI and universities. There's been a lot of talks for the past 6 months or so, but even more with the release of ChatGPT and then the recent release of GPT-4 about what that means for university education, what that means especially for assessment in the context of university. The reason for this is obviously because a lot of universities around the world rely on students writing take-home essays in order to evaluate whether or not they have assimilated the material that was in one of the classes they've taken. The problem is it's becoming increasingly easy to put together a pretty decent assessment using artificial intelligence. The first reaction of many university professors was a defensive one. How can we prevent students from using AI? This was reflected beyond education by tools quickly becoming available that are supposedly recognizing text that has been generated by AI. One of the problems with those systems is that they're far from being perfect. They will label as AI generated text that's perfectly fine, and they will also miss text that has been generated by AI. In addition, this is probably the wrong approach. There are situations in which we probably want to prevent students using AI tools because we want to know that they've remembered specific skills, specific techniques that we want them to apply. And if that's the case, it makes sense, for example, to conduct exams or other form of assessment where students are cut off from the internet. For other assessment, we just need to take into consideration the fact that the landscape has changed in a similar way than when search engines became widely available. It became a lot easier to find sources. Now with AI, it becomes a lot easier to write an assignment, and we just need to adapt. We just need to recognize that students will have access to those technologies in their day-to-day work, and we need to adapt and create assessment that reflect the conditions in which students will be working once they leave university. And that means designing assessments in which AI is but one of the tools that students will use. Another very important question that we need to ask ourselves is, with the advent of generative AI, well, some skills that were valuable become less valuable, but potentially other skills that were maybe not seen as that valuable become more valuable. For the skills that become less valuable, I will point to some resources in the description below. But an example of skill that is likely to become less valuable is copywriting. Because AI can do a reasonable job copywriting for you, you might be able to do the same work now with AI using fewer copywriters than a year ago. Now, if we think about the skills that become more valuable with the advent of AI, there are things like critical thinking, data literacy, and domain expertise is becoming more valuable because how else can you spot when your AI tool is actually hallucinating something instead of giving you a reasonable answer? And the reason I think those skills are the one that becomes more valuable is because the real threat with AI is not mass unemployment. The real threat is the proliferation of misinformation that will make it even more difficult for people to distinguish between information that is reliable and information that is just plain wrong or purposefully misleading. The argument that misinformation is becoming a problem had been made before the recent progress in AI, for example by Bergstrom and West in their book Calling Bullshit, which I highly recommend. Their argument about how one of the most valuable skills today is your ability to apply critical thinking both to what they call old school bullshit, which is essentially literary bullshit, but also to new school bullshit, which is bullshit that comes wrapped in math. This argument is even more valid today in a world in which generative AI is widely available. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I hope you found this useful. Bye for now.